everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Performing Effective Board Evaluations. I am Mark Pfister, your host for today, and we are happy to have you with us for this important topic. We have a great expert guest joining us, and I will introduce her properly in just a moment. First, a few reminders regarding our lecture today. Our purpose is to share knowledge and trending on the important topic of board and director reviews. Please write your questions in the Q&A section. We will answer all questions at the close of the presentation. If we cannot get to all questions during our hour together today, we will follow up with you via email afterwards. Regarding this webinar's materials, yes, the entire webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link via email a day or two after the webinar ends. This link will also include the ability to view and download this presentation deck in its own separate file. And of course, International Board Director Competency Designation certification holders will receive 1 CPE credit for attending today's lecture. Now, let me introduce you to our expert guest today, Dr. Sabine Dembkowski. Sabine, glad to have you with us.
That's
all right, good. So glad to have you with us. Let me do a proper introduction for you. And I'm going to first say, I had to go back and see where we had first met. I realized that we actually first connected on LinkedIn in September of 2017, believe it or not. So time really flies. It's been a pleasure following your content and all the great things you do to elevate the board vertical. So thank you. Doctor, I know, but I'm gonna take the friendly route and call you Sabine for the rest of the time today. If
yes,
that's okay.
please.
All right. So Sabine is a German national living in London. She studied business and management in Germany and the UK, completed a PhD sponsored by the Ford Motor Company. There's nothing better than a PhD paid for by somebody else. I will say that. She started her working life with American management consulting firms Kearney and Monitor Company, now a part of Better Boards. Sabine wanted to reach beyond the PowerPoint slide and trained as an executive coach with institutions in the US, UK, and Germany. She worked for over 12 years at London Business School. She discovered as a leadership advisor who was working with executive leadership teams and boards that something was just not right and decided to do something about it. Good for you, Sabine. She conducted extensive research into what makes boards effective, and her work is peer-reviewed as well as published in the US, UK, and Europe. Sabine created an innovative digital board evaluation platform that large professional service firms utilize. Sabine, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're glad to have you with us. The stage, or the screen in this case, is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, for the invitation. I did not know that we already connected in 2017. Amazing.
It is. The time really flies, I'll tell you.
Yeah. So let's jump straight in. Lots to cover, and I'm glad that you're so interested in this topic. So in this webinar, we will talk about why an effective board is so important. I'm certainly passionate about effective boards. I mean, that's what keeps me awake at night, but we are in very crucial times at the moment. So it matters. We talk about what a board evaluation is, how data is collected, how is it actually done, and what do we need to achieve to lay really good foundations for an effective board evaluation. I talk about the 7 hallmarks of effective boards. I talk about how you can use these days digital platforms. Yes, we have one. Of course, we think it's the best out there, but there are many other digital platforms. But I will tell you what matters when you see such digital platforms. And a summary of what matters should any one of you really think about conducting a board evaluation on the boards you serve. So let's start. Let's face it, it's tough being on the board. I think the comfortable years are over for the time being. The agendas of boards are full, to say the least. There are so many challenges. Good for the guys who served on boards 20 years ago. Yes, it was always tough, but I think the challenges have never been in this generation like what we see at the moment. Let's just think about the geopolitical risks, the war that is going on as we sit here in a webinar that has huge implications for and challenges for the supply chains. Some companies are really struggling already to keep production up, keep manufacturing up. And then think about ESG, digitalization, climate challenges, transformation, cybersecurity. These are huge topics that are not just topics in a way. Any of these topics actually challenge the way business is done in almost any organization at the moment. So it isn't just that you can turn one screw and it is sorted. If you turn one screw, there are hundreds others you have to turn as well. So just think about all of this is going on whilst a board has to oversee the development of an organization, the competitiveness of an organization. But it's not just that. What happens then is, of course, that boards hear a lot. You must do this, you need to do this, you have to do this, you should do this. They're consultants, they're NGOs, they're politicians, they're legislators. Everyone has some great advice. Some comes for free. For others, they have to pay thousands, if not millions at times. And everything is full of what you see here, the should, the must, the have to, the need to. The only way a board can survive all of this, it's a perfect storm, is if they are really effective, if they really absolutely are shrewd, focused, and know what they are doing and how they need to do things. So this is where board evaluations come in. What is a board evaluation? Here, one definition for you. Board evaluation refers to measures that aid effectiveness. And this is what matters in the work we do. The aiding of the effectiveness, transparency and accountability of board members, especially in the aspect of board governance. Now, anyone in the US might face a little bit less of this. In Europe, most countries have corporate governance codes, which are more or less stringent and organizations have to follow. In the US, you do not have an all-encompassing corporate governance code. You have state legislation. But the focus of any good board evaluation should not just be on governance. It should be a balance. It should also be, and I think at times it's even more important, on effectiveness. So it is a fantastic tool, but only if applied correctly. And in my years, and you see many gray hair here, much gray hair, I've seen many board evaluations. They are done, but I do not think that they are done correctly. So how is the data collected for board evaluations? In most cases, it involves some kind of interviews with board members and at times other stakeholders. More and more, we see digital questionnaires. And listed organizations mostly do a combination between interviews plus a digital questionnaire. There are some that just do a digital questionnaire or just interviews. At times, you also see that psychometric tests are added and board advisors observe board meetings in order to gain further insights. So all this data is done, and then what's mostly happening is a gap analysis. This is what you should do, this is what you must do, that is what you should have done, and this is what's actually happening. So let's really stop and pause and reflect on who are actually the people who make it to a board. These are all people who worked decades in order to get on a board. Yeah, they had successful careers as entrepreneurs, successful career as executives. They have maybe started somewhere on a board, 10 years later, they still serve various boards. These are very accomplished people who actually sit on boards. Do you really think that these people are thrilled to be assessed by a smart consultant and hear from other smart people what they should do, what they must do, what they have to? I think the answer is rather obvious. No. So what we are seeing is that people, of course, push back, consciously or unconsciously. No one likes to be assessed, particularly not people who climbed up the ladder for decades. And finally, they are in an exposed position socially. It's very visible when you are on a board. And they push back. So what this means for most board evaluations is that they're not really engaged with the process. Yes, they do them. They answer them. And then they can't wait to file the results on the shelves. It's actually not what should happen. They should engage in the process. They should really engage with the results. They should be interested in the results to see, what are these results about? What insights can I gain from that? What can I do about it? But this is very often not happening. So what do we have to do? And I took something here which we find now in many leading business schools. And I took this from a lecture from a great colleague at the time, Professor Dan Cable at London Business School. And he was talking about the fear system. So what this does is, basically, when we are under pressure, when I say certain words to you, automatically there is resistance. And automatically, when certain words are used, a chemical is exposed in our brains. The chemical is called cortisol. If we will not state it, because of course we are all adults and we put up a brave face, but basically people feel threatened, anxious, and worried. They're out to get me. And nobody wants to be found out. I mean, when I did coachings with top executives, very often it comes out that the greatest fear is to be found out that you don't belong there. Maybe it was just luck. Yeah. What, after 3 decades, it comes out that actually I'm not good enough to be here. So the action tendencies with these attitudes, the behaviors of consultants, and the way a lot of these exercises, board evaluations, board assessments, board reviews are done, they ramp up the fear system. That's a key message. Action tendencies are, it narrows the attention, people become defensive, they shut down any positive emotions, it stifles them. They don't want to experiment. They can't learn. They're in survival mode. They just want to protect themselves and their reputation. And when threat comes within a group, well, they stick together. But the worst thing on the board is if you have groupthink and submission. That is absolutely the opposite of what you want to achieve in such a process. So let's look at the bright side. What do we actually want to achieve? Certainly not the fear system, but what we want to achieve is to activate what's called the seeking system. And the seeking system is a little part in our brain. What we want is that a different drug, a different chemical drug goes all over our body, particularly our brain, of course. It's called dopamine. What it does is, that drug does the opposite. It makes us curious. It makes us excited. It makes us enthusiastic. I mean, compare the word assessment and review with holiday, vacation, surfing, ice cream, yeah, anything. We open up automatically. Sometimes you can even feel it in your chest, maybe. And the action tendencies from this are that we want to play, we want to explore, we want to experiment, we want to learn. So it's very important for an effective board evaluation that we create an overall environment where this is possible. And for this, the attitude of a board evaluator matters. The wording matters. This not only the start, but the wording of every question and the way the results are presented. So the $1 million question, how do we activate the seeking system in the board evaluation? How do we ensure that boards really engage with the process? And when they get the results, are actually willing to do something about it and don't just put it in the drawer. And that was also what part of my research was about. So basically, when I started my research, actually it started somewhere else. It was really funny, you know. I was an advisor. I was a leadership advisor. And before I got into this work, I did a lot of board away days. I did a lot of onboarding of new board members. So what happened at the start of every project, my clients were telling me, oh, Sabine, by the way, we've done a board evaluation, a board review with organization XYZ, and here's the report. Maybe it's useful. But by the way, I didn't like it. Okay, why didn't you like it? Oh, it didn't tell me anything new. I did not know what to do with it. And frankly, everything was wrong. They literally criticized every paragraph, reasoned basically why what the consultants found out was not useful at all. So I collected nicely all these reports, and I heard many, many complaints about the practice of board evaluations, board reviews. And I can really remember, and the story is on our website, I was sitting in a high-speed train in Germany and thought, you know what? Another one told me in the afternoon, another board member told me in the afternoon why he disliked the board evaluation. And then I recalled, I thought, oh gosh, I just had another conversation like this the previous week, the week before. Different people, different personalities in different industries told me very similar stories. So I thought, okay, that was the moment where I thought, hey, maybe they have a reason. Let's start somewhere. So I went to my friends at London Business School, and some people were really, really helpful and basically told me, okay, feel free. You have access to the library, you know where it is. Yeah, so I started analyzing the Anglo-Saxon and German-speaking literature. It's always good to combine various bodies of literature to get an overall view. And this literature, it's not a complex body of literature because it's hard for academics to gain access to boards. So the research is not very comprehensive. But where I could get my hands on, I read all these articles and basically teased out the variables where we have proof that they make a board more effective. And I will go through it one by one. But what was interesting at the time was that when I identified these variables and I compared these variables with the reports I saw from other consultancies, it didn't match up. they looked at different variables. And then someone advised me to say, Sabine, nobody will believe you. What you have to do is to write, publish, get it peer reviewed. And then once this is done, open your mouth again. And this is exactly what I've done. So these 7 hallmarks are published all over the place in academic magazines, semi-academic magazines, trade journals in the US, in the UK, in Europe. And now let's look at these variables, because some of them might surprise you. So we talked about the seeking system. How do you open up the seeking system? Certainly not by telling boards what they have not done, where they are poor at. Well, let's start somewhere else. Effective boards understand to leverage the strengths of its members. Now, it's pretty accepted in all leadership programs around the globe at the moment. Focus on your strengths. Yeah, it's fueled by the research in positive management science, positive psychology, has long entered the leadership literature and the leadership executive education programs. But for the generation who currently is sitting on boards, who are very often 50 plus, if they're not in young, hip tech companies, this hasn't entered their mind that it actually makes such a big difference to the effectiveness by spending time to really look into what are our strengths, what are my strengths, my personal strengths in the context of my work on a specific board. What makes me strong in a boardroom? A lot of people haven't spent time to really think about this. And if they refer to their strengths, it's strengths they might have heard as when they were executives, but certainly not in the context of a board. Another hallmark is the composition of the board. When you talk these days about the composition of the board, people instantly think gender, race. It needs to be a mix. Gender and race, in a way, are almost labels. What's far more important is the diversity of thought. It's a composition of the know-how areas. Do we have the right mix of the know-how areas? Do we have the right mix of role behaviors on this board? Do people really gel with each other? Do people complement each other? What's very often happening at the moment is organizations create a strategy. The CEO is creating a strategy. The strategy very often relates to digitization, transformation. Do you really think that this know-how area is represented at boards in sufficient detail? So the composition of the board is very often at the moment not aligned with the strategy that is formulated. How shall this work? Let's go to the next one. Clarification of roles and responsibilities. There are many, many gray areas on a lot of boards. When the roles and responsibilities are not clearly defined and you have gray areas, this is very often a source for conflicts. Vision, goals, and focus of the board. Of course, everyone has a vision. But is the board really aligned around this one vision? Yeah? Even if we formulated a vision, do we all understand the words? Do we all have the same thoughts? Do we really think along the same lines about this vision? Another hallmark is structure and organization of the work of the board. So this is a classical territory of a board evaluation. How is the board working together? How are the board meetings organized? How are the board sessions run? I have yet to do a single board evaluation where we didn't find 1, 2, 3 items where a board could become better. And the ability to resolve conflict. Is the board able to resolve conflicts amongst each other, between the board and management, between the board and staff, between the board and investors, between the board and the outside community? And then there is one thing that has suffered in the last 2 years because of the pandemic. Regular reviews and reflection of the work of the board. Everything has become faster, much more digital. We all meet in the virtual world. We all do webinars. We all do our Zoom calls. And boards are taking definitely less time than some years ago. Some years ago, it was very, very common in Europe, and I'm sure in the US as well. Before the night before a board meeting, board members were meeting, had a dinner together. Maybe once a year they came together. They took the time to really reflect. This is somehow all got cut out. And this is one of the big secrets. Take regular time out, reflect about how are we working together? What is it we could do even better? This is not a mix with a strategy session. Yeah, I've heard often it's asked, oh, we planned a strategy day. Can we somehow cut off a little bit of time and maybe you can have 2 hours to talk about this? And I say, no, sorry. It's a dedicated session where nothing else is happening. We are not discussing operational issues. We are not discussing strategy. We are not discussing how to get the next investor on board. We are discussing simply and only how are we working together as a board? What could we do better? What have we learned? So if you look at all of these 7 hallmarks, it's pretty comprehensive. There are behavioral issues, structural issues, process issues, all balanced out. And above all, when you show this, when I show this, I share this with chairs, with CEOs, it has a very high face validity. They go, yeah, it makes sense, yeah. Although it is grounded in research, it's an evidence-based approach, it makes sense to practitioners, and it's purposefully not in an academic language. How can you capture all of these elements? Certainly not by observing the board. I have to tell you, each time when I get asked, do you think it makes sense that you attend the whole board meeting? I say, yes, if you pay for it, but I don't think you get much value from it. Why? I tell them, look, it is absolutely proven in scientific research. The moment you observe the subject is changing. The moment a stranger is suddenly sitting in the boardroom taking notes, do we really believe that board members behave as normal? And I have certainly seen that when you then present the results and you refer back to this board meeting because you're describing what you have observed, then you hear lots of cop-out clauses. Oh, this meeting was different because so-and-so wasn't there, or no, this was a one-off because we had to discuss this or this issue. So the results don't stick. So in order to get through all these items, a digital platform does help. Yeah, particularly if a digital platform is very flexible and not just static. This is our homepage. Yeah, there are many other platforms out there. Important is, I think if you look at platforms, try to understand the approach to a board evaluation behind it. What's the foundation? Is it just some questions banked together based on the corporate governance code or on some governance literature, or is it really based on some research? What's the goal behind it? Is it to tick the box for governance, or is it to make a board more effective? And I think what a digital platform can do, and what we do very extensively, is we provide benchmark data. Yeah, benchmark data for every hallmark. We can tell the board for every hallmark that you've seen on the previous slide, how they compare with other boards. And we can even say how they compare with other boards in the industry or in their country. And this really matters because board members are competitive. And if you can present some benchmark data, I always say it's very motivating in a positive way. They're willing to do something about it. So, yeah, I might come back and tell you a little bit more about what it can do. But I think in the years to come, we will see much, much more the utilization of digital platforms. So what can it do? Again, I can only talk about ours. I've seen others, of course, as well. Access to a research-based questionnaire. You get live updates on the completion status of who has answered the questionnaire, who hasn't, so that you know where do you have to follow up. Automated analysis of quantitative data, comparisons to other boards, and graph generation. And the graph generation is, again, something very, very important. At the moment, a lot of the practice is still based on written reports. If you think about how is a written report generated, the information was running through the filters of a board advisor. It is not this difficult for a smart director to turn around and say, why did you write it like this? Yeah, is this your subjective perspective? Yeah. So in order to avoid all of these discussions, we are really a strong believer in data. Yeah. Here, have some graphs, have some data, and as a director, as a member of a board, you are smart enough to take ownership and to interpret the graphs as you see it. Quick analysis of qualitative data, and very important, individualized reports. Most board evaluations provide one report to the chair or for the board. This one report does not help an individual director to really understand what am I supposed to do differently? What does it mean for me personally? It's nice, the results, yes, but hey ho. Individualized reports are important because everyone contributes. Yeah, it's individual collective performance comes together. The moment every individual director understands what she can do differently, overall performance will benefit, of course. And year-on-year comparison. Systematic longitudinal data helps to develop a board systematically. And I very often joke because in most of organizations, you will see that these organizations have better data about their graduate trainee program than they have about their boards, because comparable data very often does not exist. And it is wrong. If you want to develop a strong board and systematically, you need data. So key takeaways. I think in order to conduct an effective board evaluation, the attitude towards directors matter. These are smart, accomplished people. I very often too much see a competition. Who is the smartest in the room? Yeah. As a consultant, I have to be smarter than that director. That does not go down well, and it is not helpful. Make sure that you activate the seeking system to ensure engagement with the process and the results. It doesn't, what good is a board evaluation when the directors are not engaged? They will do nothing about it. Utilize research. Absolutely. Think about what is it that makes boards effective. Use our 7 Hallmarks model if you want, use other models, but really think about what is it actually that makes boards really, really effective. Use the power of a digital platform. You need data. Data is a fantastic foundation. Much better than the most beautifully written report that can easily be dismissed because it's regarded as being subjective. And I can only encourage, which is why I got excited to, after all these years, to be in touch with Mark. What we need is people who take the development of boards seriously and who actually want to provide education, to provide data, longitudinal data, to develop boards systematically. Thank you.
All right. Sabine, thank you so much. We have a bunch of questions here I'll go through, but I'll first start by saying that some of the trending aspects that you mentioned, such as possibly the shying away from putting time into evaluations during COVID times due to other more pressing areas, I guess was the thought process. I see that trend also, and I can tell you that it has not done many boards many favors during this time frame to push that off. I do think that many boards are coming out of the pandemic not as cohesive as they were going in, quite frankly. You'd think it would be the opposite, but that has not been my observations, I'll say, at least in the short term at this point. But I do think those evaluations will come back, as you likely would think as well. Let me jump into a few of the questions here so we can maximize our time while we have you today. All right. Do you always recommend engaging an outside party or group to perform evaluations?
No. Frankly, we offer our platform also to people to use it. Of course, they pay a fee for it, but what happens in Europe is the corporate governance code stipulate that you have to do a fully facilitated external board evaluation every 3 years. And in the years in between, the company secretaries, the offices, do an internal evaluation. The problem with this practice at the moment is that they do then year by year something different. Yeah, they use consultant A, then they put together an internal questionnaire, then they use consultant B, then they use a platform. So there is no cohesive data. You can't really compare it. And I think this is a problem. Can a board do this type of work without an external consultant? To some extent, yes, of course, but they should always start with proper measures and proper data. Because otherwise the risk is you end up with meaningless, very often philosophical discussions that don't really lead to action and improvements.
That's a great segue into the next question of consistency. How can the nominating committee ensure consistency of reviews? And I'm assuming that trending components is probably being considered in that question also from what you've discussed year over year.
I think this is what we are seeing now. This is why digital platforms are actually helpful, because organizations can come back year after year, and these platforms help you without much work to basically track the changes. Where has the board developed specifically and where has it got worse?
Great. All right, let me pull another one here. How much emphasis should be put on overall board versus individual director reviews, and is there an acceptable ratio?
That's a very, very good question. And I think individual and collective have to come together. If you just do an overall analysis, it's very easy for individuals to sit back and say, what does it all have to do with me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or, yeah. Oh, I thought though, oh, this phenomenon described in this board evaluation, it's something what I said all along. Fine. But be aware, it's a responsibility of everyone. Everyone has to take ownership of the results. And be willing to do something about it, which is why it's so important that boards are really engaged in this process and that you give them something individually and collectively so that they understand what they can do on their own and where they need their colleagues and where they have to work together.
Great. All right, here's a fun question. Dr. Sabine, they say, how do you personally limit the dislike of board evaluations?
To be honest, I find it fascinating. I find it fascinating. I think the work is a great privilege, and you always learn something on every evaluation. And I'm really interested in the life stories and what you hear from the directors. It's fascinating. I think you have to be really interested in it in order to do it. It's like people feel if you mean it. Yeah, if you just do it because, I don't know, you think it's something sexy to do, or if you really love what you do, it always shines through.
Yeah. If I could just expand on that, knowing that, and you alluded to this in one of your comments about stepping in from the outside, the consultant coming in to direct the board basically, or guide a process. Are there certain things that you do, Sabine, in your process? Maybe is it an education first, like you did today, talking about the importance of the evaluations, how to process that data once it comes out, how to make the board better? Are there certain steps that you take personally in that process to educate on the importance of it, to limit the dislike, I'll say, to keep on this question that came through?
I trained also as an executive coach, as you said, and one of my trainers at the time said, if you really dislike someone, focus on something you like about this person. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be the shirt he is wearing, the glasses she is wearing. You always find something and then focus on that you really like, and your attitude will change towards this person. And I think it was a great little tip, to be honest. It really works. I think you always find something that is working. And this is also something, I think as consultants, we are almost too eager to focus on what's not working. Let's focus on what is working and expand on what is working. And this different perspective very often surprises the boards we work with. Yeah, why do you come from that angle? Mm-hmm. But in the process, they see the point why this is actually the more joyful way of developing and learning.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, very good. All right, another question. Are there any additional or unique hallmarks that are important for boards of family-owned companies?
Again, a great question. We haven't found any. One thing I didn't mention, when we showed you the graph for the 7 hallmarks, in the middle, you saw leadership behaviors. So what we see on the family-owned business, it's even more complex. The firms are very often smaller than listed organizations, but what you have to grapple with is much more difficult intellectually, because here you have much more entanglement of relationships, things that happened in the family sometimes decades ago. Yeah. So-and-so wasn't invited to the wedding. Oh, when was the wedding? Well, 35 years ago. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I think you have the variables are absolutely the same of what we talked about here today, but be prepared when you're walking into a family-owned business that it's far more complex. It will take you much, much more time to grapple with all the issues because of these histories, relationships, likes, dislikes, stories. And only when you actually understand all this family context, you can actually really help them.
Yeah, I can appreciate this question as well. I've worked with a very good amount of family-owned businesses, and I've realized that my first role was more of a psychologist, and then it's into the consulting realm. So I can definitely appreciate that question. Probably similar to the answer of private equity structured boards as well, which have their nuances also. All right, another question. Go ahead, please.
We haven't mentioned this, if I may mention it, Mark. The Better Boards podcast series. I just recorded a podcast that's coming out soon with a chair who has an excellent reputation for running private equity owned boards. What is different is that you always have this investor in the room. As private equity owned companies, it's again the same variables, but be aware that the investor is also sitting on the table. The investor has specific interests, and these interests are not necessarily aligned with the interests of management. Mm-hmm. So again, greater complexity, but the same variables. But be aware of this, of these additional complexities.
Yeah, and typically more than just one investor, right? So from different organizations, different lenses, different investment portions as well. So there's a lot of dynamic in those boards as you're mentioning.
Yeah.
All right. Another question: are you proposing charters or something of the like for clarification of roles and responsibilities of directors and the overall board? I think this is relating back to the clarification of the board's roles and responsibilities from your diagram. Are you proposing charters or something such as charters for the clarification of roles and responsibilities?
Yes, I've very often seen that these are most helpful, because sometimes you have to come back to what is a board supposed to do? What's the role of a board? What's the role of someone sitting on a board? And it's very, very helpful.
Great.
In fact, quite often in board away days, we actually help a board to come up with a charter so that they have some guiding principles, guiding rules, and they can be very powerful.
Great, thank you. Sabine, pleasure to have you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience. And thank you everybody for joining. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye now.